There are warnings that come from history, and then there are warnings that come from the human soul itself. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." And that is the silent catastrophe he warned us about. Not a war, not technology, not the end of civilization, but something more subtle and more dangerous, the loss of the human self. He saw it coming, a time when people would become strangers to their own inner world, when identity would no longer come from who we truly are, but from what others see. A time when the noise outside would grow so loud that the voice within would fade into silence. And now, that warning has become reality. Look around. We have everything: connection, progress, knowledge, and yet we're emptier than ever. We scroll endlessly, not because we care, but because we're afraid of what silence might show us. We chase validation like oxygen, likes, views, approval, anything that reminds us we still exist. But Jung warned that when you abandon your inner life, something dark takes its place. The shadow, the unconscious part of you that contains everything you reject, deny, or hide, begins to rule. He saw it happen during his time. Societies collapsing into ideology, people surrendering their individuality for collective illusions. He called it psychic possession, a state where people don't think, they are thought by something else. Jung said, "The greatest danger to man is not the forces of nature, but his own unconscious." And that is the danger we live in now, a world full of intelligent people who have lost touch with their souls. You've felt it. That strange sense of emptiness after achieving something you thought would make you happy. That hollow feeling when you're surrounded by people, yet feel invisible. That constant urge to be busy, productive, distracted, just to avoid sitting alone with your own thoughts. This, Jung said, is not life. It's psychological sleep. He believed the modern human suffers not from lack of meaning, but from the illusion of meaning. We fill our lives with activity, noise, and artificial goals because true reflection terrifies us. When was the last time you sat in silence, not with your phone, not with music, just you, and really listened to what's inside? Most people can't do it. Because silence reveals the truth, that beneath all our masks, the confident one, the kind one, the successful one, there is someone we don't fully understand, someone we've been avoiding. And Jung said that person, the one you ignore, is the key to everything. Jung called it the divided self, a conflict between the mask we wear, what he called the persona, and the reality we hide, the shadow. The persona is what society teaches us to be: polite, composed, agreeable. It's the image you create to survive the world, your social armor. But underneath it lies the parts you repress: your anger, jealousy, greed, vulnerability, and fear. The emotions you've labeled as bad. You bury them so deep that you forget they exist. But Jung warned, the shadow never disappears. It waits. It grows stronger in the dark. And one day, when you're weakest, it takes over. You see it when someone suddenly explodes in rage after years of silence. When a seemingly kind person turns cruel. When a peaceful crowd becomes a violent mob. Jung said these moments reveal the shadow's revenge. What's repressed doesn't die. It returns, demanding to be seen. Imagine standing in front of a mirror that doesn't reflect your face, but your soul. Every hidden motive, every lie you told yourself, every part of you that you pretend doesn't exist. Would you look? Most wouldn't. Because we've been trained to see darkness as evil, not as truth. But Jung taught that only by facing the shadow can you become whole. He said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. That's the essence of his warning. He wasn't telling us to fear the darkness. He was telling us to understand it. Because when you deny your darkness, it doesn't go away. It just finds a way to control you from the shadows. We live in an age of unconsciousness, where people don't think. they react. Where opinions replace understanding, where outrage feels more satisfying than reflection. Jung saw this danger decades ago. He said that the individual who doesn't confront their own inner world becomes part of a collective mind, a hive consciousness where everyone feels the same, believes the same, and fears the same. That's what he called mass man. A person who has traded individuality for belonging. A mind so busy fitting in that it forgets how to be alone. And that's why Jung's warning matters now more than ever. Because in the age of mass information, the real rebellion is introspection, to think deeply, to feel genuinely, to see the world not through trends, but through truth. Jung's message wasn't just a psychological theory. It was a prophecy. He saw what happens when humanity loses touch with its inner world, when people stop reflecting and start performing, when shadows roam free in a world that has forgotten light. He tried to wake us up, to remind us that every soul has a battlefield inside it, and those who don't face that battle become soldiers in someone else's war. His warning was simple, but few people understood it. If you refuse to know yourself, something else will take control of you. Carl Jung believed that humanity's greatest threat would not come from nature, nor from technology, but from the depths of our own unconscious minds. He warned that when we stop reflecting, when we stop confronting the darkness within, the unconscious begins to leak into the world around us. It starts quietly, like smoke slipping through cracks. And before we know it, we're breathing it in every day. He called this the rise of the collective shadow. It's not just the darkness in one person, but the darkness of an entire society. Hidden fears, unspoken hatred, the quiet envy that grows in silence until it becomes a storm. Jung said that when a civilization ignores its own inner truth for too long, the repressed elements of its collective psyche start to express themselves in destructive ways, through violence, corruption, and chaos. And if you look closely, you can see it now. People are divided not just by ideas, but by emotion, anger, fear, resentment. We no longer speak to understand. We speak to win. Every disagreement becomes a battle. Every mistake becomes a sin. Jung would say this is the shadow of modern man, our own unconscious darkness reflected in society. He warned that when the individual loses the courage to look within, they project that darkness outward. Instead of saying, "I am capable of evil," they say, "They are evil." Instead of asking, "Why am I afraid?" they say, "They are the enemy." And that's how wars begin, not just on battlefields, but in hearts. Jung saw this happen in his lifetime, during the rise of totalitarian regimes. He said that people who refuse to face their inner fears become vulnerable to collective ideologies. They surrender their individuality in exchange for belonging, certainty, and order. He called it psychic infection, when ideas possess people, not the other way around. That's why Jung believed that self-awareness is not a luxury. It's survival. When you don't know who you are, the world will tell you. It will hand you an identity, a label, a belief, a side, and you'll wear it, thinking it's your choice. But it's not. It's your shadow wearing a mask. You've probably felt this yourself. That pull to fit in, that pressure to agree, that instinct to stay silent rather than say what you really feel. You might think you're keeping the peace, but Jung would say you're feeding the collective shadow, the part of society that thrives on silence and conformity. He said, the larger the crowd, the smaller the individual. And that's what's happening now. People are losing themselves in the noise of the collective. They scroll, they post, they react. But they rarely stop to ask, who am I when the noise stops? We live in an age where everyone has a voice, yet few have anything true to say. Because truth doesn't come from trends. It comes from silence, from solitude, from the uncomfortable act of facing yourself. Jung believed that every person carries a spark of consciousness, something sacred that can see, reflect, and choose. But that spark dies when you stop questioning. When you blindly follow what everyone else believes, you become a shadow of yourself. He warned that if humanity doesn't awaken to its own unconsciousness, We would become consumed by it. We would externalize our inner chaos until the world mirrors our own confusion. And isn't that what we're seeing? A world of endless conflict, outrage, and noise, where everyone is reacting and no one is reflecting. The shadow isn't evil. It's simply everything you haven't faced. But when millions of people refuse to face their own darkness, it becomes collective madness. It turns into polarization, fanaticism, and fear. Jung said that the only antidote to this is self-awareness, the courage to say, I am part of this. The darkness I see in the world exists in me too. He believed that true transformation begins when a person takes responsibility not just for their actions, but for their potential for both good and evil. Because the moment you admit your capacity for darkness, you stop projecting it onto others. You begin to see humanity not as a war between light and dark, but as a delicate balance between both. Jung often said that each of us carries within us a small piece of the world's soul, what he called the collective unconscious. It's the hidden web that connects every mind, every culture, every story. And within that web lies both creation and destruction. When humanity evolves, that collective energy moves toward consciousness. When it regresses, it moves toward chaos. He believed that modern civilization is standing at that exact crossroads, between awareness and unconsciousness, between individuality and mass identity. And he warned that if people continue to run from self-knowledge, the unconscious will rise in new forms: anxiety, addiction, obsession, and extremism, the modern expressions of ancient fears. He said the world won't end because of hatred or ignorance alone. It will end because people stop knowing who they are. Because when the inner world collapses, the outer world soon follows. That's why Jung's message feels like a mirror, not just to our minds, but to our time. We're living in the world, he predicted, brilliant, connected, yet spiritually starved. A civilization so focused on progress that it forgot the soul that created it. But Jung didn't just warn us. He offered a way out. He believed that the same unconscious mind that can destroy us can also heal us. Because within the darkness lies potential, raw, unfiltered, and alive. And those who dare to face it can become the light this age has forgotten. He said, in each of us there is another whom we do not know. He speaks to us in dreams and tells us how differently he sees us. That other self, the hidden one, is not your enemy. It's your guide. And perhaps Jung's greatest warning wasn't just about the collective shadow, but about forgetting that voice, the quiet, inner one that still whispers beneath all the noise. The voice that says, wake up. Remember who you are. Carl Jung once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. This was not just a poetic statement. It was a warning, a whisper from the depths of the human psyche, telling us that what we refuse to see in ourselves eventually rules us from the shadows. Imagine for a moment that your life is a grand stage. You're the actor under the spotlight, confident, composed, playing your role. But behind the curtain stands another you, silent, watching, waiting. This hidden self remembers everything you've forgotten, every suppressed emotion, every denied truth, every part of you that you decided was too much for the world to see. That hidden self is what Jung called the shadow. It isn't just darkness. It's the sum of everything you've buried to survive, the anger you've swallowed, the ambition you've feared, the desires you've disowned. You've spent years keeping it out of sight, but it's never gone. It waits in the dark corners of your mind, influencing every choice you make. You see, Jung didn't believe the shadow was evil. He believed it was honest, brutally honest. It's the part of you that refuses to lie, the part that knows who you really are, not who you pretend to be. He observed that most people go through life constructing masks, what he called the persona. This is the image you show the world, polite, respectable, accepted. But the more tightly you cling to that mask, the more powerful your shadow becomes. Because whatever you suppress doesn't disappear, it gathers strength. Think about the times you've lost control, when anger erupted out of nowhere, or jealousy burned through you before you could stop it. That wasn't bad behavior. That was your shadow reminding you it exists. Jung said that if you ignore your shadow long enough, it will show itself in destructive ways, through projection, through emotional outbursts, through the quiet sabotage of your own happiness. It's not the darkness that destroys us. It's our refusal to look at it. Jung once worked with a man who seemed perfectly ordinary, successful, polite, admired, but every few months he would explode in uncontrollable rage. He didn't understand why. Through deep analysis, Jung uncovered a lifetime of suppressed humiliation. The man's shadow was filled with resentment, shame, and a deep hunger for respect. When those feelings were ignored, they erupted violently. Jung realized that the man's rage wasn't his enemy, it was his repressed truth, trying to be heard. And this is what happens to all of us. We say, "I'm fine," when we're breaking inside. We pretend to forgive, when resentment still poisons us. We hide our ambition under false humility, our pain behind sarcasm, our fear behind pride, and slowly, the distance between who we are and who we pretend to be becomes unbearable. That's when life begins to unravel, not because we are cursed, but because the unconscious is demanding to be known. Jung described this as the call of the shadow. It arrives quietly at first, through dreams, strange coincidences, or emotional triggers. You meet someone who irritates you instantly. You think they're arrogant, selfish, or fake. But Jung would say, look closer. What you hate in them is often what you refuse to see in yourself. Projection is how the shadow communicates. You see your own unacknowledged traits reflected in others, like a mirror you didn't ask for. The person you despise might embody the boldness you repress. The friend you envy might live the freedom you deny yourself. The one who scares you might simply reveal a part of you that's been exiled for too long. This is why Jung said that meeting your shadow is both terrifying and liberating, because when you realize the monster in the dark is you, something changes. You stop running. He wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Facing the shadow is not about becoming perfect, it's about becoming whole. It's about reclaiming all the pieces you've scattered over a lifetime of pretending. But here's the paradox. The more you resist your shadow, the more power it has over you. Yet the moment you turn toward it with awareness, its grip begins to loosen. Think of it like a wild animal. It attacks when cornered, but softens when seen. The shadow behaves the same way. It doesn't want control. It wants acknowledgement. When Jung confronted his own shadow during his psychological crisis between 1913 and 1919, he described visions that terrified him. He met figures from his unconscious, gods, demons, and forgotten faces from myth. But instead of rejecting them, he listened. He wrote, "I had to let myself fall into the depths. Only there did I find that what seemed like hell was full of life." Through this descent, Jung discovered something profound. The shadow is not just the container of darkness. It is the birthplace of creativity, power, and authenticity. The very energy you once used to hide your truth becomes the same energy that fuels transformation. Imagine a person who represses anger all their life. They seem calm, kind, controlled. But beneath the surface lies a vast reserve of strength and passion. When that anger is understood, not suppressed, it becomes assertiveness, a force for change. The same is true for fear. When accepted, it becomes awareness. Shame, when faced, turns into humility. This is the alchemy of the soul, turning darkness into light, not by denial, but by integration. Jung called this process individuation, the journey of becoming whole. It's not about becoming someone new. It's about remembering everything you already are. The shadow, when integrated, becomes your ally, a silent guardian that keeps you grounded, real, and fully alive. But it's not easy. Most people never take this journey. They'd rather cling to comfort than risk confrontation. They'd rather blame others than explore themselves. And yet, Jung believed that true freedom, true peace, lies on the other side of this confrontation. Because the shadow you fear is not there to destroy you. It's there to complete you. The real question Jung leaves us with is hauntingly simple. What parts of yourself have you abandoned in order to be loved, accepted, or safe? Because the day you face them is the day your fate begins to change. Carl Jung once said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." And perhaps that's the hardest truth about his warning. The path to awakening isn't gentle. It doesn't come from books or from pretending to be wise. It comes from being shattered, from watching your illusions burn until all that's left is the truth. The truth that you are not just light. You are everything. The dark, the broken, the forgotten, the brave, the cruel, the kind. You are the whole spectrum of what it means to be human. And Jung warned us about this. That if we refuse to face the parts of ourselves we hate, we will keep meeting them in others, over and over again. The people who trigger you the most are often reflections of the parts you haven't healed. That's why your life feels like it repeats. Same arguments, same disappointments, same kind of pain wearing a different face. It's not random. It's your unconscious, trying to get your attention. He believed the universe, or perhaps the psyche itself, has a strange intelligence. It keeps bringing us the lessons we refuse to learn, the mirrors we refuse to face, until we finally turn inward and ask, what is this trying to show me? That moment of awareness, when you stop blaming and start understanding, is where transformation begins. But make no mistake, it's not easy. Facing your shadow feels like betrayal, because it asks you to question everything you thought you were. It asks you to see the masks you wear, the people you pretend to be, the stories you tell to keep yourself safe. You'll realize how much of your goodness was performance, how much of your strength was just defense, how much of your love was rooted in fear. Jung wrote about this phase as the night sea journey, a descent into darkness, not to drown, but to find what was lost. When you walk into your own darkness, you start to see the truth about the world, too. You realize how many people live asleep, consumed by distraction, chained by unacknowledged pain. They wear smiles but carry ghosts. They speak loudly but never listen to themselves. Jung didn't just warn us about the unconscious mind of individuals. He warned about the unconscious of society. He saw it as a collective shadow, built from everything we refuse to acknowledge as a civilization: greed, hate, fear, violence. He wrote that when societies refuse to face their shadow, they project it onto others, through war, prejudice, division. That's why his work feels more relevant now than ever. We are living in a world where our collective shadow has taken form. Online outrage, tribalism, the hunger for control. And yet, Jung believed there was still hope. But only if individuals began to awaken. Because each person who faces their own shadow contributes to healing the collective one. When you stop running from your pain, you stop adding to the world's chaos. When you forgive yourself, you stop needing to destroy others. When you embrace your darkness, you become less dangerous, not because you're weaker, but because you're finally conscious. He once said, "A man who is possessed by his shadow is always standing in his own light." That's what the shadow does. It blocks your growth, your peace, your purpose. But the moment you see it, really see it, the light returns. And something incredible happens. You stop fearing your flaws. You begin to use them. Your pain becomes empathy. Your anger becomes courage. Your insecurities become understanding. The very wounds you thought disqualified you from peace become the bridge to it. That's why Jung called the shadow the seat of creativity. Because when you stop pretending to be perfect, you start creating from truth. Art, love, wisdom, they all come from the union of light and dark. So, What did Jung warn us about? Not some external enemy, not demons or systems or fate. He warned us about our own blindness, the danger of not knowing ourselves. Because when you don't know who you are, someone else will tell you who to be. Society will shape you. Trauma will drive you. Fear will control you. But when you begin to see, when you bring your unconscious to light, you start living by choice, not by compulsion. You become something rare, someone who is no longer afraid of themselves. That's the person Jung wanted each of us to become. Not saints, not heroes, but whole human beings. People who can look at their reflection and say, yes, I have darkness, yes, I have light, and both belong to me. That's the paradox of awakening. When you stop rejecting your shadow, it stops controlling you. When you face your inner chaos, you discover your inner peace. And maybe that's what Jung meant all along, that salvation isn't found in light alone, but in the courage to walk through darkness consciously. So tonight, if you feel lost, if you feel haunted by patterns you can't explain, by emotions you can't control, stop running, sit with your shadow, listen, ask it what it wants you to know. Because the one thing Jung warned us about, the one truth few people understand, is this. The darkness you fear the most is not outside of you. It's the part of you that still remembers who you really are.